The ICU was quiet. Too quiet. Jae-sun moved like a shadow, his black shoes making no sound against the polished hospital floors. Every step was deliberate, precise, a choreography born of years in the shadows of the Mafia world. He had a single goal tonight: eliminate the target. The man lying unconscious in room 312 was already at death's door from illness. Jae-sun's task was almost ceremonial. But as always, the simplest plans in his life had a tendency to spiral into chaos. His eyes scanned the corridor. Monitors beeped softly in rhythm with the hospital's mechanical pulse, the fluorescent lights casting sterile lines across the walls. He had just the strap of the cloth bag slung over his shoulder, feeling the cold steel of the knife pressed against his side. One wrong move and alarms would scream louder than any heartbeat. He had done this 1,000 times before, yet tonight felt different. As he rounded the corner to the ICU, his mind rehearsed the plan one last time. Move in. Eliminate. Exit. Nothing complicated. Nothing emotional. Simple. Then it happened. He collided with her. Hard. The impact knocked the air out of his lungs for a fraction of a second. He barely managed to steady himself before realizing who, or what, he had collided with. A woman, standing just tall enough to be imposing in her own chaotic way, looked up at him with wide, startled eyes. A clipboard was clutched precariously in her hands, pens scattered across the floor like confetti. "Oh my!" she exclaimed, but her voice was quickly swallowed by the sudden clatter that followed. The knife. It had slipped from its hidden sheath in his cloth bag during the bump and landed on the floor with a muted clink. Reflexively, Jae-sun's hand shot down, snatching it from the floor in a movement that was at once fluid and terrifyingly precise. He barely blinked, but the world seemed to slow around him, the way her eyes had widened, the slight hitch in her breath, the chaotic energy radiating from her like a storm about to break. He froze for the briefest of moments, feeling something he wasn't supposed to feel, a spark. Not just alertness, not just professional calculation, but intrigue. Magnetic, sharp, distracting. Her gaze met his. It was fleeting, but it seared itself into his mind. She was chaotic, yes, but there was a spark of mischief there, a glint that made his pulse quicken in a way that had nothing to do with danger. His mind screamed at him to focus. This was an enemy, or at least a mission. Yet in that moment, he felt something else entirely, something dangerous in its own way. Sir. Her voice wavered, just slightly, as if the absurdity of the situation had caught her off guard. Are you? He didn't answer. He didn't have to. The knife was secure in his hand, the mission still in mind, but his attention was caught, tethered, held hostage by her presence. She bit her lip, hesitation written across her face. Maybe I should call security? Or an emergency? Her words stumbled out awkwardly, tumbling over one another in nervous chaos. Before she could act further, the nurses nearby moved in unison, their hands waving, their eyes urgent. Code red. ICU emergency. All staff respond. Angel blinked. And in that blink, the moment was gone. Alarmed, distracted, and obedient to instinct, she turned sharply on her heel and sprinted down the corridor toward the source of the emergency. The knife, the collision, the strange, magnetic pull between them, it evaporated in the white fluorescent haze of urgency. Jae-sun remained frozen for a heartbeat longer than necessary, watching her retreating figure. Her coat flared behind her like a chaotic banner, her heels clicking unevenly against the tile. Something in her gait, the energy she radiated, and the effortless way she seemed to dominate the space around her left him unsettled. Unsettled. That wasn't a word he used often. Nor did he often feel things like this, the pull of a stranger, the hint of something dangerous yet thrilling in the form of a human being who had no idea of the truth he carried beneath his careful exterior. His eyes lingered, catching her laughter, soft, melodic, though muffled by her quick steps, as she barked orders at nurses and staff. Even in a moment of professional chaos, she seemed untouchably vibrant, untethered, and alive. Alive in a way that made him want to be something else. But there was no time for distractions. He shook his head almost violently, like clearing fog from a mirror, and turned back to the hallway. His mission required focus, precision, and detachment. Yet the image of her, wild, chaotic, brilliant, lingered in his mind. He could feel the tension in his chest, a tightness he didn't recognize. It was a dangerous distraction. A beautiful one. He moved down the corridor, silent, efficient, every muscle tuned to stealth. Yet he could not entirely shake the memory of the collision, the way she had stared at him, that split second of vulnerability and curiosity, the way she had almost, but not quite, questioned him. There had been humor there, buried beneath chaos, an almost imperceptible smirk in the corner of her lips that hinted at her personality, brilliant, untamed, unpredictable. His hand brushed the knife's hilt under his coat, a reminder that reality had not changed. He had a target. A mission. And yet, in the hollow silence of the ICU corridors, he realized that for the first time in a long while, his thoughts were not solely on danger, money, or reputation. They were on her. The woman who had sprinted away, chasing an emergency that would likely consume her for hours. The woman who had, in just a brief collision, left a mark on him far deeper than any mission could justify. Jason paused near the ICU doorway, briefly peering inside at the pale figure of his target, completely oblivious to the unfolding chaos. The man would live, or die, according to Jason's next steps, but for the first time, he hesitated. Not out of fear, but curiosity. Fascination. Something entirely unprofessional. Something that made him forget, just for a fraction of a moment, that he was a trained killer. And as he finally stepped away from the ICU, disappearing into the sterile, white-lit labyrinth of the hospital, one thought lingered stubbornly in his mind. That doctor. She is going to be a problem. Not in the way a mission could fail. Not in the way a rival could interfere. No. She would be a problem for him. For his heart. And somehow. He couldn't wait to see her again. Jason's heart was still pounding as he made his way to the staff locker room. The tension from the ICU collision with Dr. Angel lingered in his chest, warm and distracting, yet the mission demanded focus. He had to get closer to the target, who lay oblivious in room 312, and his next step required a drastic measure. He crouched beside the unsuspecting male nurse in the empty supply corridor, timing his move with precision. The man had been in the right place at the right time, oblivious, distracted by his clipboard, and completely unaware that his life was about to be hijacked for a few hours. A swift, precise motion, and the nurse went down silently, sprawled awkwardly across the linoleum. Jason caught his breath, immediately taking the man's scrubs from his locker, slipping into the uniform, and adjusting the mask over his face. The transformation was flawless. Every detail, from the embroidered name tag to the neatly tucked shirt, had been studied in advance. He was now Nurse Park, the shy, masked young man that Dr. Angel had apparently been infatuated with for months. Jason exhaled, the knife still secured under his scrub top, his movements silent and fluid as he merged with the hospital staff. Yet the moment he stepped into the main hallway, he realized that pretending to be a nurse was not as simple as slipping on a uniform. The hospital was alive with activity, squeaking carts, ringing phones, nurses calling for instruments, and Angel herself darting past him in a blur of chaos, her laughter ringing like bells as she barked instructions to her colleagues. "Okay, team. Let's get those vitals stabilized, Park, you're on monitors." She called over her shoulder, her tone teasing and clipped. Jason froze for a heartbeat. Park. That was his assumed identity. He swallowed and stepped forward, mask tight over his face, voice low but even. "Yes, Dr. Angel," he said. She glanced at him, one eyebrow raised. There was something in her gaze, a spark, a recognition, a flicker of amusement that made the muscles in his jaw tighten. She knows him. She knows him for being shy. And now, she's looking at me. Angel's curiosity was sharp, her instincts honed from years in chaotic emergency rooms. But she wasn't suspecting anything. Yet. What she saw was the familiar shy nurse she had always had a soft spot for, the one who always wore his mask even when talking, the one she had teased relentlessly from afar. The familiarity made her smirk, her eyes crinkling in delight. Park, did you check the vitals on room 310 yet? She asked, her tone playful, a little teasing. Her hand brushed against his arm as she passed, and Jason's breath hitched just slightly. He could feel the subtle warmth of her touch through the thin fabric of the scrubs. Yes, Dr. Angel. All within normal ranges, he replied smoothly, masking the internal storm of confusion and desire. She laughed softly, a musical, teasing sound that struck him somewhere deep. You know, I swear you always look so serious under that mask. I don't know how anyone could take you seriously. It's kind of adorable, actually. Adorable. The word lodged in his chest like a dart. His professional mask of detachment, years of training, discipline, and control, cracked imperceptibly. He wanted to correct her, to remind himself that he was not the shy nurse, that he was here for a deadly purpose, but the warmth in his chest betrayed him. He liked the way she looked at him. The way she laughed at his adorable seriousness. And then it hit him, she was flirting. Openly, shamelessly, right in front of him. And it wasn't casual flirtation, this was the playful teasing of someone who had a long-standing crush on him, the shy nurse she had adored from afar. The thought should have made him panic. It didn't. Instead, it made his pulse accelerate in a completely different way. He moved through the day with mechanical precision, delivering medications, adjusting monitors, and responding to her orders. Yet every time Angel's hand brushed against his, every time her laughter rang through the hall, every time her eyes lingered on him with that teasing spark, the mission faded in the background. He became aware of her scent, clean, faintly floral, with an undercurrent of antiseptic, and the warmth of her presence, the way she moved so freely through the chaos of the hospital, commanding attention and laughter with equal measure. At one point, she dropped a syringe onto the floor. Oh, Park. Really? You're letting me down today. She teased, reaching to pick it up. He bent smoothly, retrieving it before she could even touch it, handing it to her with a bow of mock formality. Never, he said, voice calm, controlled. Her laughter erupted, pure and melodic, echoing down the hallway. You're ridiculous. You're so ridiculous, you know that? Ridiculous. The word, repeated again, became a theme of the day. He was ridiculous, in this uniform, hiding a lethal secret under his mask, trying to navigate the minefield of her flirtatious teasing without revealing himself. Yet he didn't mind. Not at all. Their interactions became a dance of subtle touches and glances. When she leaned over to add just a monitor, her hair brushed against his arm. When she glanced at the charts he handed her, her fingers grazed his in a way that made his breath catch. Every encounter, every accidental contact, was electric, an unspoken conversation of attraction and tension. Angel, meanwhile, was oblivious to the truth. She only saw Park, the shy nurse she had been crushing on for months, coming to life in unexpected ways. His hands were steady, precise, his voice calm, but there was something new, something more confident, more magnetic. She laughed at his serious face, teased him about his habits, and flirted with a lightness that made the entire day feel like a game. Jason, for his part, felt the walls of his professional detachment crumble. Every instinct screamed at him to maintain focus on the target, but his eyes kept drifting to her face, the way her eyes sparkled when she smiled, the way her laughter softened the sterile edges of the hospital, the curve of her lips when she whispered playful reprimands. He caught himself imagining what it would feel like to touch her, to hold her hand, not as the assassin, but as the man behind the mask. The irony of it wasn't lost on him. He was a killer, trained in precision and secrecy, and yet here he was, disarmed by a woman who didn't even know his real identity. Each laugh, each teasing glance, each playful touch chipped away at the coldness he had perfected over years. And somehow, he wanted it. By the end of his first shift as Park, the day had become a blur of stolen glances, near touches, and suppressed laughter. Angel's charm, her chaotic humor, and her oblivious flirtation had begun to unravel him, thread by thread. For the first time in a long while, he realized that the hardest part of his mission might not be the target at all, it might be the woman who didn't even know he existed. As the afternoon sun filtered through the hospital windows, casting long, sterile shadows across the floors, Jae-sun paused outside the break room. He allowed himself a brief moment to observe her. Angel laughing with another nurse, her hand resting casually on a counter, her eyes catching the light in a way that made his chest ache. "This is going to be more difficult than I thought," he admitted silently. Not because of the mission, not because of danger, but because she had already infiltrated his mind, his heart, and everything he thought he controlled. And as he had just the mask over his face, slipping once more into the persona of Nurse Park, he realized something dangerous. He was starting to care. And that was the kind of vulnerability a Mafia man wasn't supposed to have. The hospital was a living organism, humming with activity, its pulse measured in the beeps of monitors and the shuffle of hurried footsteps across polished floors. Jae-sun, still clad in the borrowed scrubs of Nurse Park, navigated the corridors with the precision of a trained predator, but this time, every step felt like walking on a tightrope made of silk and fire. Angel was everywhere, a whirlwind of chaos and charm, her energy pulling him in directions he had not anticipated. It began innocuously enough. "Park," she called, her voice light, teasing, "could you grab the thermometers from the supply closet? The ones with the colored tops. Red for high, blue for low, don't mess it up." "Yes, Dr. Angel," he replied, keeping his voice steady, though inside, his pulse was hammering. Thermometers. Of all things. Why did a simple thermometer assignment feel like defusing a bomb right now? As he bent to retrieve the instruments, she appeared at the doorway again, leaning against the frame with her arms crossed, her hair falling in wild waves around her face. She tilted her head, smirking. "You know, Park. You're far too serious for someone wearing scrubs. You should smile once in a while. Patients would love it. I would love it." Jae-sun froze mid-bend, the thermometers clutched in his hands. His breath hitched at the warmth in her words, the teasing undertone, the weight of her gaze. "She's flirting with me. Flirting. And I can't. I can't respond the way I want." He straightened, handing her the thermometers. Their fingers brushed. A brief, accidental contact, but it was enough to send a jolt through him that was both exhilarating and terrifying. Angel noticed it too, and a mischievous smile curved her lips. "Careful, Park. Don't hurt me," she teased, her eyes sparkling. He nodded mutely, clearing his throat, reminding himself, mission first. The target. Focus. But Angel had other plans. Throughout the morning, she drew him into a series of absurd tasks. One moment, he was holding patient charts while she juggled a pile of folders and bounced between rooms, the next, he was fetching instruments for her surgical prep, standing awkwardly as she orchestrated a symphony of chaos in the pre-op room. "Park, pass me the scalpel," she called over her shoulder, not bothering to hide the grin tugging at her lips. He obeyed, his hand trembling slightly, not from fear, but from the proximity of her. Each time their hands touched during the exchange of instruments, he felt it, a heat that crept along his forearm and up his chest, betraying his composed exterior. He wanted to pull back, to remind himself he was here for a mission, but her gaze held him captive. It was teasing, magnetic, and impossible to ignore. At one point, she nearly walked straight into the sterilization room, dragging him along without a second thought. "Wait, Park. You know the trays go there, don't you?" She called, laughing when he followed, dragging his feet to keep pace. Yes, Dr. Angel, he replied, voice flat, though internally, his heart was doing acrobatics. She glanced at him over her shoulder, catching him off guard. You're too serious, she said again, this time softer, almost affectionate. Do you ever let anyone see the real Park? Or is it all masks and charts and reserved glances? Masks. Charts. Reserved glances. Jason's mind snapped to attention. I am Park, yes. But I am not Park. The truth pressed against him like a live wire, but her words, the teasing tone, the playful warmth, they chipped away at the walls he had built around his heart. He could feel the tension between mission and desire growing heavier with every step. Angel had completely monopolized his day. She asked him to hold a patient's floor while she adjusted the monitors, then redirected him to organize the pre-op trays, laughing when he nearly spilled a stack of charts in his haste to follow her instructions. Park, careful. You're going to make me think you're clumsy. She teased, stepping closer to steady him. Her hand brushed his arm again, and for a heartbeat, he imagined what it would feel like if he didn't have to hide behind a mask, if he could lean in and press his lips to hers, just once. The thought made his chest tighten painfully. She caught his brief pause, noticing the shadow of distraction behind his composed mask. What's going on with you today? You're distracted. Did someone break your heart, or are you just easily distracted by me? She laughed, the sound pure and melodic, as if daring him to reply. He didn't. He couldn't. Words would betray him. Instead, he followed her lead, executing the tasks with mechanical precision while internally battling a storm of emotions he had not felt in years, distraction, longing, and an infuriating desire that had nothing to do with the mission. As the afternoon dragged on, their interactions became more physically intimate, though innocent in appearance. She guided his hands to the correct placement of instruments, leaned close to whisper instructions, and occasionally brushed against him in passing. Each contact made his pulse spike, betraying the cold, controlled exterior he worked so hard to maintain. Angel, meanwhile, remained blissfully unaware of the truth. She only saw the shy, masked nurse she had always adored from afar, now suddenly playful, responsive, and, somehow, even more intriguing than before. In a quiet moment, she paused in the hallway, leaning against the counter and watching him straighten a set of charts. You know, she said, voice low and teasing, I've always thought you were interesting. Reserved, yes, but also quietly charming. You have this aura. Like you're keeping secrets. Secrets that might be fun to uncover. Jason's breath caught in his throat. Secrets. She didn't know the half of it. The knife at his side, the mission, the truth about who he really was. All hidden beneath this uniform, under this mask. And yet, the vulnerability in her tone, the subtle warmth, and the directness of her gaze made him ache with something he had never allowed himself to feel, the possibility of connection. The day wore on, filled with absurd tasks, playful teasing, and a growing tension neither could fully articulate. Every glance, every accidental touch, every shared joke chipped away at the mission-first mentality that had defined him for so long. By the time Angel dashed off to answer a pager, leaving him momentarily alone in the supply room, Jason allowed himself a deep, almost imperceptible exhale. The world was spinning differently now. He was a killer, a trained assassin, but he had been disarmed by a woman who didn't even know his real identity. Her laughter, her chaotic energy, and the flirtatious way she had claimed him for her amusement had begun to dismantle him piece by piece. He adjusted his mask, tugged the scrubs into place, and glanced at his reflection in the polished metal of the supply cabinet. Park's face stared back at him, shy, masked, calm. But behind those eyes, his eyes, burned a storm of desire, distraction, and a dangerous infatuation. This is going to get complicated, he admitted to himself, a rare, uncharacteristic smile tugging at his lips. Much more complicated than I expected. And in the back of his mind, he realized, with equal parts fear and exhilaration, that his next moves wouldn't just be about the mission anymore. They would be about her. About the chaotic, teasing, breathtaking woman who had no idea who he really was, and yet had already stolen a piece of his heart. The operating theater smelled sharply of antiseptic and the faint metallic tang of sterilized instruments. The bright overhead lights created harsh, white pools that reflected off the polished steel tables and glinted in Jae-sun's eyes. He adjusted his mask for the fourth time, ensuring the straps didn't slip, and reminded himself to breathe evenly. Just a minor surgery. Stay calm. Stay focused. Don't blow your cover. He glanced around the small OR. Only the essential staff were present, Angel in her surgical coat and gloves, a scrub nurse, an anesthetist, and now, him, Nurse Park. The irony was delicious in a bitter way. He, a trained assassin, was now pretending to be a shy, masked nurse, fumbling through surgical protocols in front of the very woman whose chaos and charm were slowly disarming him. "All right, team," Angel said, her voice calm but tinged with humor. "We're not saving lives today, just removing a small cyst, but let's pretend it's open-heart surgery. Adds drama." She winked at him, and even through the mask, he could sense the spark in her eyes. Drama. Right. That's exactly what my life needs right now. The first task was simple, hand instruments on demand. But Angel had a mischievous streak. She didn't ask politely. She barked instructions like a general in the heat of battle, throwing a scalpel across the sterile field. "Park. Scalpel. Quick." "Don't think," I said, quick. Jae-sun's reflexes took over. He snatched the instrument mid-air with the kind of precision that could have come from years of lethal training. His heart was pounding, not from danger, but from the proximity of Angel's body and the teasing heat of her gaze. She leaned closer than necessary, just to guide his hand in the correct angle, and he swore he could feel the warmth radiating from her gloves through his own. "Careful, Park," she whispered, though loud enough for him to hear. "You're shaking. Are you nervous?" "I'm fine," he said, voice controlled, but his pulse betrayed him, thundering in his ears. His hands, perfectly steady during a gunfight, trembled slightly as they passed instruments back to her. Every brush of her fingers against his sent shivers through his chest, and for a fraction of a second, he imagined what it would feel like if the mask weren't between them. Angel's laughter cut through the tension, high and melodic. "You're ridiculous," she said, rolling her eyes. "Seriously, Park. Are you always this stiff?" He swallowed, forcing himself to stay in character. "Stiff. Focused. Calm. Deadly. Not distracted by her." But even as he reminded himself of his mission, every glance, every shared breath beneath the masks chipped away at his composure. The absurdity increased when Angel decided to improvise mid-surgery. Instead of following the standard procedure, she picked up a surgical suction tool and began demonstrating an unconventional technique, narrating every movement like a comedian explaining a magic trick. "See, Park. This is called controlled chaos," she said, voice low, teasing. "You have to move like you're floating on air, but precise, like, I don't know, like balancing a cup of coffee on a tightrope." Jae-sun suppressed a laugh, his mind both racing and melting. Controlled chaos. That was exactly what his life had become since meeting her. A tightrope of distraction, desire, and absurdity. His fingers hovered over instruments, ready to assist, while he simultaneously kept track of the AI surgical assistant on the screen, a sleek hospital robot that sometimes misinterpreted commands with hilarious consequences. "Park," Angel said suddenly, bending slightly to add just a monitor, pressed the button on the suction device. "No, not that one. The other one. I swear if you mess this up, ill." A jolt of electricity shot through him as their hands brushed again. His pulse spiked. She noticed it. She always noticed. She smirked under the mask, a subtle teasing sparkle in her eyes. I feel like you're enjoying this way too much, she said, voice teasing but low enough that only he could hear. Yes, Dr. Angel, he replied, voice clipped, masking the turmoil inside. Enjoying this. How could he enjoy chaos, flirtation, and minor surgery all at once? And yet, he did. Every accidental touch, every shared glance, every whispered instruction made his heart race faster than any firefight ever had. As the surgery progressed, their interactions became a dance, part work, part flirtation. She guided his hands subtly, whispered instructions that forced him to lean closer than necessary, and sometimes paused to meet his eyes through the masks. Each glance held layers of humor, challenge, and attraction. He realized, painfully and thrillingly, that he could follow her every lead, every joke, every teasing comment, and still be utterly disarmed by her presence. By the time the minor procedure was done, and the final instruments were being cleaned and returned, Jae-sun's chest was tight with emotions he wasn't supposed to feel. The mission, the target, the deadly life he led, it all felt impossibly far away. Angel, in her chaotic brilliance, had pulled him into a world of laughter, teasing, and unexpected intimacy. She turned to him, brushing a stray lock of hair from her forehead, and gave him that smirk again, softening the edges of her chaos with a small, almost imperceptible warmth. Good job today, Park. You weren't completely hopeless. He allowed himself the briefest flicker of a smile. Thank you, Dr. Angel, he said, voice low, steady, hiding the storm inside. As he left the operating theater, adjusting his mask for the umpteenth time, he felt the magnetic pull of her presence linger behind him. Every step away from her felt heavier, and every glance over his shoulder confirmed the dangerous truth he had been denying: he was no longer just on a mission. He was entangled in something far more chaotic and unpredictable, Angel herself. Now. Meet me in my office. Immediately. Don't make me come find you. Jae-sun's chest tightened, not from urgency, not from danger, but from the undeniable pull of her command. That simple request carried weight. It was not just professional, it was personal, intimate, and mischievous. His mind raced as he realized that following her now meant stepping into her personal space, confronting a tension he was powerless to resist. And yet, as he looked at her, the way her eyes sparkled beneath her surgical mask, the curve of her lips just visible, the energy that seemed to electrify the air around her, he felt something he hadn't felt in years, the thrilling, terrifying, and utterly irresistible lure of attraction. For the first time since arriving at this hospital, and perhaps for the first time in years, Jae-sun allowed himself to consider something completely dangerous, completely human, that this mission might not just be about the target anymore. It might also be about Angel, the woman whose laughter, chaos, and teasing had already begun to dismantle the walls around his heart. And with that thought, he took a deep breath, squared his shoulders, and prepared to follow her, knowing that whatever happened in her office next would change everything. The office smelled faintly of coffee, antiseptic, and Angel's subtle floral perfume, a combination that immediately unbalanced Jae-sun's carefully maintained composure. He closed the door behind him, careful not to let the click echo too loudly, and faced her. Angel was leaning against her desk, one eyebrow arched, her dark eyes sparkling with mischief, and something more. Something electric. Park, she said, voice low and teasing, I need your help with a few things. Nothing complicated. Just small stuff. Her smile lingered, softening into something dangerously intimate. Jae-sun nodded, swallowing thickly. Of course, Dr. Angel, he said, voice steady despite the rapid hammering of his heart in his chest. Every fiber of him was alert, not because of the mission this time, but because of her. The proximity, the way she moved, the subtle heat radiating off her body, it was intoxicating. Angel's gaze lingered on him in a way that was almost unbearable. She leaned forward slightly, brushing a stray lock of hair from her face. The movement was casual, but to Jae-sun, it was deliberate, and his chest tightened painfully. She stared at him for so long that he felt as though every thought, every secret, every instinct were stripped bare under her watchful, teasing eyes. "Why are you staring at me like that?" he asked, trying to keep his voice clipped, professional. But even he could hear the slight falter in it. Angel smirked, stepping closer, her hand brushing lightly against his chest. The touch was electric, and Jason felt his breath hitch involuntarily. Her fingers lingered on the fabric of his scrubs, and he felt an unfamiliar warmth spreading through him, making it almost impossible to maintain the calm, detached persona of Nurse Park, or the cold, lethal focus of Jason the assassin. "I don't know," she said softly, teasing in tone but heavy with intent. "Maybe I'm imagining things. Or maybe you just make it hard to concentrate." She leaned even closer, and her lips were nearly brushing his mask. He could feel her breath, warm and slightly sweet, and his chest tightened so violently that he thought he might collapse. His hands stayed rigid at his sides. He could not move. He could not respond. Not fully. The duality of his life, the calculated assassin beneath the borrowed uniform and the man who was suddenly, dangerously, completely captivated, waged war in his chest. Every nerve in his body was alert, screaming at him to pull away, yet every instinct told him to stay, to lean into the dangerous tension, to see where it led. Angel's hand slid down from his chest to the edge of his scrubs, grazing his hip lightly. The sensation was electric, igniting a fire he hadn't felt in years. Her eyes flicked up to his, dark and sparkling, and she whispered, softly, seductively, almost like a command, "Kiss me." The word hit him like a thunderclap. "Kiss me." Angel, the chaotic, teasing, utterly unpredictable woman, had dared him, ordered him, almost, to cross a boundary that would collapse the walls he had built around himself for decades. Jason's hand twitched, almost reaching toward her, but he stopped himself. Every part of him wanted to obey, to feel her lips against his, to lose himself in her completely. But he reminded himself, the mission. The disguise. You cannot. And yet, she closed the final distance. Her hands slid from his chest to his shoulders, steadying him, guiding him toward her. His pulse raced so hard he thought she could hear it under the mask. Every breath she took mingled with his, every small movement of her body pressed him closer, and the tension became unbearable. She was relentless, playful, and terrifying all at once. Her eyes, dark and sparkling, locked on his. "Park," she whispered, "you can't deny it now. You want this as much as I do. Don't fight it." Jason's chest tightened painfully. "I can't. I shouldn't." And yet. His hands shook, his heart pounded, and his identity, the duality of assassin and man, felt impossibly tangled. Every instinct screamed to maintain control, but every muscle, every nerve, every suppressed desire screamed in the opposite direction. And then, finally, she reached up and grabbed him firmly, pulling him so close that their faces were inches apart, their breaths mingling, the heat between them tangible and electrifying. He shifted back slightly, feigning composure, trying to retreat without revealing the storm raging inside him. "Dr. Angel," he began, his voice low, controlled, but it faltered under the intensity of the moment. Her hands shot out instinctively, catching him by the shoulders. She tilted her head, her expression unreadable but commanding. "No, Park. Don't step back. Don't hide. Stay. Here." Her fingers lingered lightly on his chest, brushing over the fabric of his scrubs. The touch was deceptively casual, yet the effect was devastating. Every nerve ending in Jason's body screamed at him, igniting heat, tension, and a sudden, overwhelming vulnerability. He swallowed hard, fighting to maintain the duality of his existence, the calm, controlled assassin and the masked nurse she thought she knew. Then, in a move that sent his heart into overdrive, she reached up deliberately and yanked his mask from his face. Time seemed to slow. Her eyes widened, pupils dilated, and her hand froze mid-air as the fabric fell to the floor. The man standing before her, the one she had flirted with, teased, and nearly seduced in the sanctuary of this office, was not the shy nurse she had admired. The truth crashed into her with the force of a hurricane. Jae-sun's heart hammered in his chest as he watched the color drain from her face. Recognition flickered in her eyes, and the memory of their first, bizarre encounter in the ICU, the knife, the bump, the fleeting, charged glance, hit her with full force. Angel's body stiffened, her mind racing to reconcile the man before her with the one she had been flirting with all these days. You're. She whispered, voice trembling, incomprehensible. You're the man. The one from the ICU. Yes, he admitted, voice quiet but resolute. It's me. The room seemed to tilt. All at once, Angel's world spun into chaos, the flirtation, the laughter, the intimacy of the last few days, and now the devastating revelation of deception. Her body shook, and her breath caught in her throat. The playful, teasing woman who had dominated their previous interactions was suddenly overwhelmed by shock, confusion, and a torrent of emotions she had never anticipated. Jae-sun took a cautious step forward. Angel. But before he could finish, her knees buckled. She collapsed forward, her body rigid for a brief moment before surrendering entirely. Jae-sun reacted instinctively, catching her in his arms. Her head rested against his chest, her dark hair brushing against his collarbone, and he felt the faint warmth of her breath, uneven and fragile. Panic surged through him. No. Not now. Not like this. He adjusted his hold, supporting her weight while trying to maintain his composure. His eyes darted around the office, searching for anything that could help, anything that could stabilize her. Angel, the chaotic, brilliant, unstoppable force who had consumed his thoughts for days, was suddenly delicate, unconscious, and entirely in his care. Her lips parted slightly, and Jae-sun felt an almost unbearable ache in his chest. Every instinct he had trained to suppress, the assassin's calm, the cold precision, the detachment, collapsed under the weight of his feelings. He had tried to keep his emotions at bay, tried to focus on the mission, but now it was impossible to ignore the truth. He was hopelessly, undeniably in love with the woman he had been deceiving. He breathed in sharply, his hands tightening gently around her. Angel. Please wake up, he murmured, his voice low, laced with fear and longing. I can't lose you. Not like this. Not after everything. The irony of the situation was bitter, almost cruel. He had spent hours pretending to be someone else to get close to a target, only to find himself ensnared in a far more dangerous trap, his own heart. And the woman he adored, whose laughter had disarmed him more effectively than any gun or blade, was now literally in his arms, fainted from shock and emotional overload. Minutes stretched into eternity as he held her, pacing lightly to keep her upright, murmuring reassurances he wasn't sure would be heard. His fingers brushed lightly through her hair, carefully avoiding the edges of the scrubs, and he marveled at the softness of her in a way that had nothing to do with mission protocol. Angel lay unconscious in his arms, delicate and surprisingly heavy, the warmth of her body pressing against his chest in a way that made his normally disciplined instincts fray at the edges. He took a deep breath, attempting to steady himself, to summon the composure that had made him a feared Mafia operative. But today composure felt impossible. He gently laid her across a plush couch in the corner of the office, careful not to jostle her. The faint rise and fall of her chest reassured him that she was still breathing, yet every second she remained unconscious magnified the panic in his chest. Her dark hair spilled over the cushion, curling around her face, and he felt a surge of protectiveness that had nothing to do with the mission. This is impossible. I am hopelessly in love with her, he admitted silently. Steeling himself, he rose, adjusting the borrowed nurse scrubs. The mission wasn't over yet, technically, but every thought of the target, the kill, and the deadly assignment was completely eclipsed by one consuming concern, Angel. Her laughter, her unpredictable charm, the way she had taken control of his emotions. All of it replayed in his mind with painful clarity. He couldn't focus on anything else. The corridors of the hospital awaited him, bright and sterile, but far from orderly in this moment. Alarms blared faintly from distant wings, blinking lights casting surreal shadows across the floor. Nurses bustled past, some curious, some rushing toward emergencies, and gurneys with squeaking wheels blocked sections of the hallway. Every step forward felt like a battle, not of weapons, but of timing, balance, and sheer improvisation. "Focus, Jae-sun," he muttered to himself under his breath, gripping the edge of the couch lightly to steady himself. But as he glanced back at Angel's resting form, a soft smile crept across his face despite the chaos. "I don't care about the mission anymore," he admitted. "Not really. Right now. She's all that matters." He hoisted her into his arms once more, careful not to disturb the unconscious rhythm of her breathing. Angel's head rested against his shoulder, and he could feel the warmth radiating through the thin fabric of her scrubs. Every movement, every adjustment, reminded him how real, how dangerous, and how intoxicating this situation had become. He had entered this hospital as an assassin, but he was leaving it, if only temporarily, as a man utterly ensnared by love. The corridor ahead was obstructed by a pair of curious nurses, chatting animatedly and glancing in his direction. Jae-sun froze. Not now. Not now, he thought. Timing, precision, subtlety, these had always been his allies. He sidestepped into a supply closet doorway, holding his breath as the nurses passed, their laughter echoing down the hall. One of them stopped, squinting toward the door. Did I just see someone?" she asked, tilting her head. Jae-sun stiffened, gripping Angel a little tighter, heart hammering. "Don't move. Don't breathe. Don't be seen." The nurses continued past, oblivious, and he exhaled slowly. His pulse slowed only slightly. She is here. Safe. For now. That's what matters. Further down the corridor, a gurney suddenly veered into his path, wheels squealing. He shifted Angel slightly, angling her across his chest, and deftly maneuvered around it, balancing her weight like a trained acrobat. Every step was measured, careful, and filled with unspoken reverence for the unconscious woman in his arms. His mind wandered despite the need for focus. He recalled Angel's laughter in the oar, the way her eyes sparkled even through surgical masks, the teasing tilt of her lips, and the soft brush of her hand on his chest. "She doesn't even know how she disarms me," he thought, a smile tugging at his lips. And yet, completely undone. A sudden alarm blared nearby, one of the AI systems malfunctioning after his earlier disaster, and he cursed softly. Gurneys were barreling down the hall now, patients being wheeled frantically, and nurses were calling for code carts. The hospital had turned into a chaotic storm, and yet, in the midst of it, his only focus was Angel. Her safety, her warmth, her unpredictable charm. He ducked into another hallway, narrowly avoiding a nurse carrying a stack of medical charts. "Excuse me," she shouted, glancing at him curiously. Jae-sun simply nodded, his focus unbroken, his arms steady despite the sudden rush of adrenaline. Mission, forgotten. Everything is secondary. Only her. He reached a quieter wing of the hospital, where he finally paused, leaning her against a wall. He crouched slightly, brushing a strand of hair from her face. Her lips were slightly parted in sleep, and he could hear her soft, steady breathing. Every inch of her presence drew him closer, made him feel both alive and vulnerable in ways he had never expected. "Angel," he murmured, his voice barely above a whisper. "You're safe now. I've got you." He wanted to press his lips to her forehead, to feel the warmth of her again, but he resisted. The duality of his life, the assassin, the nurse, the man who had deceived her, still demanded caution. And yet, he couldn't stop thinking of her. Every chaotic step down the hall, every alarm, every obstacle only intensified the swirl of emotions inside him. Her laughter, her teasing, the unexpected moments of intimacy, they haunted him more than any mission ever could. He leaned back slightly, scanning the corridor for the safest path. His mind was calculating, precise, but now, in the midst of chaos, it included something else, a plan to protect her, to navigate the absurdity of the hospital, and to hold on to the woman who had unknowingly stolen his heart. Finally, he reached a quiet side lounge. He gently laid her across a couch once more, adjusting the blanket over her. He knelt beside her, watching the faint rise and fall of her chest, and allowed himself a rare, vulnerable moment. He had come here as a killer, a man of precision and cold control, but in this absurd, chaotic, heart-pounding scenario, he was something entirely different, a man utterly in love, utterly captivated, utterly undone by a woman who had no idea of the depth of his feelings. The city skyline stretched before Jason as he stepped out of the hospital, the crisp evening air hitting his face like a splash of reality. In his arms, the mask of Nurse Park still clung to him, not physically, but in the form of the persona he had carefully curated these past few days. Each step away from the hospital was a battle between duty and desire, the cold precision of the assassin colliding with the tumultuous warmth that Angel had ignited in him. He paused at a shadowed alley across the street, glancing back at the hospital. The building's lights glowed softly against the darkening sky, and through the large windows, he imagined her, dark hair disheveled, cheeks flushed, eyes wide with confusion and lingering embarrassment. Every movement, every laugh, every accidental touch played on a loop in his mind. His heart twisted at the memory of her, at the feeling of holding her in his arms, at the way her warmth had invaded him completely. She had fainted, yes, but in that moment she had been utterly, dangerously close. Her lips nearly brushing his, the teasing, urgent whisper for a kiss. And then nothing. The memory was searing, impossible to shake. He exhaled slowly, fingers flexing as if he could somehow grab onto the ghost of that sensation. Minutes stretched into long, contemplative hours. Jason found a quiet corner near a street cafe, blending into the shadows as he watched the hospital's windows. The memories continued to play in his mind, Angel laughing at his flustered attempts with the AI, teasing him relentlessly in the operating theater, the intimate tension in her office before she had fainted. Why does she have this effect on me? He wondered silently, pressing his fingers to his forehead. I'm supposed to be an assassin. I'm supposed to be cold, efficient, untouchable. And yet. He shook his head, unable to stop the flood of emotions. Every muscle in his body ached to see her, to touch her again, to hear her laugh. And yet, he was painfully aware that the moment had passed. The hospital had become a place of memories, a theater where their brief, chaotic, and intensely intimate interactions had played out, and now he was outside, separated from the woman who had undone him entirely. Meanwhile, Angel, now fully recovered and utterly flustered, paced in the security office. She could hardly believe what had just happened. I almost kissed. A stranger? She thought, pressing her hands to her face in disbelief. Her mind scrambled to process the absurdity of it all, and a wave of self-consciousness washed over her. The fact that the man had seemed so familiar, so commanding, and yet so completely unknown, everything about the encounter made her feel both foolish and flustered. She muttered under her breath, voice tinged with a mix of humor and disgust, "Ugh. I almost kissed a total stranger. How? How could I?" She shook her head, a laugh bubbling out despite herself. It was the kind of laugh that was part exasperation, part disbelief, part embarrassment, and entirely Angel. Her colleagues looked at her quizzically. "Everything okay, Angel?" one asked, noticing the flush in her cheeks. I just. Never mind," she replied, waving them off, trying to regain her composure. But her fingers brushed against her lips instinctively, a faint reminder of how close she had come to an incredibly intimate, completely shocking moment. Meanwhile, across the street, Jason's thoughts wandered to a quiet, private plan. He would not be able to see her again immediately, not with alarms raised and security actively searching. But that didn't mean he could remain silent. From the shadows, he pulled a small notebook from his coat pocket and began to write. Each word was deliberate, each sentence a mixture of confession and longing. Angel, he began, I don't know if you will ever read this, or if it even matters. But I cannot stop thinking of you. Every laugh, every glance, every moment we shared, stays with me. You have undone every carefully built wall around my heart. I don't know how to fix this. I only know that I want to be near you, to protect you, and to know you. Even if I must remain unseen for now, even if this confession is foolish, even if I am a stranger in your eyes. He paused, staring at the hospital windows, imagining her figure moving inside, her dark hair glinting in the artificial light. He could almost hear her laugh echoing in his mind, soft and chaotic, full of life. I will find a way to see you again, he wrote finally. No alarms, no disguises, no chaos can keep me from the truth, I am hopelessly in love with you. Folding the note carefully, he slipped it into his coat pocket. It was not for her eyes yet, but it was a tether, a thread connecting him to her even across the divide of distance, misunderstanding, and farcical hospital chaos. Back inside, Angel, still muttering to herself and shaking her head, finally sank into a chair. She pressed her fingers to her lips again and laughed quietly. I can't believe I almost kissed a stranger, she murmured, the absurdity of the situation mingling with embarrassment. What was I thinking? The contrast of their experiences, his longing, her humiliation, created a quietly humorous symmetry. Outside, Jason watched from a distance, heart heavy yet full, a smile tugging at his lips. She has no idea. He thought, and yet she's already changed everything. But the question still lingers, who is the man Jay wants to eliminate? Who sent him? Where's Nurse Park? Jay's mission wasn't over yet. In fact, he had done nothing at all. He has got to get back into the hospital and finish his job or risk losing his life. How can he achieve that? Let's ask Nurse Jay. Sorry, Nurse Ella. He doesn't just want to assassinate, he wants Dr. Angel too.